Get ready! I read a whopping 203 books in 2024, and now is the time for the Kelsi's Choice Awards! Essentially, my version of a reading survey. From the most emotional book I tackled, all the way to the coziest read I discovered, I'm dishing out opinions and handing out my coveted Kelsi Corn trophies. The categories featured include Most Unique, Weirdest, Bleakest Book, Best Romance, and more! So if you're itching to know which books came out on top, then check this out, because the list of winners from 2024 is epic! Now let's crown some corny champs! Welcome back to my channel, Slime and Slashers, where we talk about horror books. As I said in the intro, this is my version of a reading survey. People like Gabby Reads have done similar things to this. Essentially, I'm just going through different categories and awarding a favorite book for the category. And I will say, the difference between my version of this and some other people's would be that I have nominees, and I do discuss the nominees, and all the nominees are worthy of being in each category. So to me, this video is about celebrating all kinds of books that I've read in 2024. Not necessarily every book that I will mention today or that is nominated in each category was a book on my top 20 favorite reads of 2024. If you have not yet seen that video, I will link it down below and also up in the card, so check that out after you're done watching this one. But there are going to be different books mentioned here that were not in that video. So like I said, this is a wider reaching video, a deeper video where I talk about a little bit more of favorites than just the top 20. So I'm really excited about that. I love doing that. So without further ado, I will link the previous year's awards down below, and let's get started with this year's. Before we get into the categories, let's just go over a few statistics to lay the groundwork here. As I said in the intro, I read a total of 203 books, but I do want to mention that about 25 of the books were children's picture books. So really, in terms of just, full-length, real, actual books, middle grade YA and adult, I would say it's more like 175, 180. My most read genre, of course, is horror, and I don't ever see that changing because that's my favorite genre of all time. Let's talk about the longest and the shortest books. The longest new-to-me book I read was 607 pages long, and that was The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. My longest reread, which I only had 2 rereads, but my longest of the rereads, which is actually my longest book total, is Eclipse by Stephanie Meyer, and that comes in at 629 pages. The shortest, I guess you could say it's a book. Really, it's more like a short story, but I did find it as a book to check out from Kindle or from Libby or somewhere. It was 24 pages, and that was a little weird story called The Weirdest World by R.A. Lafferty. The first category is for the corniest read, and this is a corny award, and I don't mean corny in a bad way. I mean it in a fun, kind of very specific to me way. So for this category, I am nominating books that feel like they were written just for me. Kelsi Corn Awards, corniest. This means that these books, for some reason, appeal to me, perfectly fit me, my vibe, my kind of jam when it comes to what I like in books. So here are the nominees. Goldenland, Past Dark, Kill Ball, Grim Memorials, and A Choir of Ill Children. Before I announce the winner, just a few details about the nominees. I loved all of these books. In my opinion, they're all wonderful. Will they be for everyone? No. But they were all very much for me, and I love them all. So, Goldenland Past Dark, we've got this wonderful main character who's a dwarf traveling with a very minimalist carnival. And we follow him throughout his life. He's not really a reliable narrator, but I still found the book very enjoyable. It was 5 stars. Kill Ball. This was like a giallo set in a universe where everyone is trapped within a plastic bubble. And the premise is absurd, but the author knows that the premise was absurd and just ran with it anyway. Honestly, this is so me. It's insane. It's kind of ridiculous how me it is. I love giallo movies. It's something I got into recently in 2024, so I found this book at the perfect time. Next nominee, Grimm Memorials, had dark fairy tale vibes, but make it nasty, make it splattery, make it gory, make it ridiculous. Not to be crass, but does Snow White get banged by the 7 dwarves? Yeah, yes, not like literally, but there are these crazy nightmare visions happening where people are seeing things that aren't really there, and one of the things they see is this twisted version of Snow White's fairy tale. We're the dwarves. No! Leave Snow White alone! But she's into it. But it's kind of weird to think of it that way. Anyway, that book was so gory, such great references to traditional fairy tales, but again, much darker. Even though the original fairy tales are very dark, it made it even darker, and it made it crazier, and a little out there, but I loved it. And last but not least, A Choir of Ill Children. I really have a hard time describing this book. I don't know if anyone would like it as much as me, but something about the writing really just worked for me. And the setting was really fun. It was a small southern town. It felt like a southern gothic slow burn, but make it weird, and also make it really slow and meandering, and have really interesting, zany characters. So all of those together make a book that perfectly matches what I like, usually. And our winner is, dun 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 dun, A Choir of Ill Children. This one just felt so perfect. And I wrote a rhyming review for this book, because it was a readathon prompt to write a rhyming review, and my review says, "A strange brother, he is a 3-headed dude. Don't judge, don't stare, don't be rude. Another brother, Thomas, he's the leader of the brood. A small swampy town with strange beliefs. It's a weird read. Naked reverend on the loose is not what they need. Mysteries abound. Granny Witch wanted Thomas's seed. Reading this book was like smoking weed." That really honestly just sums it up. And it really, honestly, after rereading my review, it's the perfect choice for the corniest award. The next category is for the book that was the most unique, and our nominees are The Rising by Brian Keene, some of the most unique representation of zombies I've ever seen. I don't usually like zombie stories. This one I freaking loved. Next up, another old school monster trope done well, and that is Monastery. And Monastery, vamps, but vampires done in a different way, and that's what I liked about it. Next nominee, The Hike. Just a super unique, weird book. I haven't read a weird book that goes in quite this direction. Very thought-provoking, very enjoyable, and there's a talking crab, and I loved that crab. Skin by Kathy Koja. This one was unique because of the way it was written. The way it is written is almost prose-like, and I feel like that made it stick out for me as a unique read. It won't be for everyone, especially those who want a very linear story, a very easy to understand story, and a story with a lot of action, because this is more about an artist's tortured journey to create their art. I feel like the book almost is a piece of art in itself because of the way it is written. Next up, Sabbath of the Fox Devils. Splatterpunk gore mixed with a very sad, very relatable main character who's just trying to live his best life and trying to figure things out. He has a tough home life, and things quickly start to go to hell for him. He thinks he's trying to make his life better, but when he ends up doing, makes it more complicated, to say the least. And I've just never read any other book like this. That's why it lands on this nomination list. Next up, Saurian, a very unique animal attack book, not your typical standard animal attack. It isn't just a big creature, or in this case, big sea creature, just mindlessly attacking. There's much more. And last nominee is Nightscape, and this one is just really unique because I thought it was going to be a straight-up vintage horror story that was just full of cheese, and it was not that. It actually had some depth, and it went into a direction I didn't see coming, so it surprised me, and overall, it was unique, hence being on this list. But now it is time to give out the award. So which of these nominees are we awarding a Kelsi Corn award to? Dun 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 dun! It goes to Sabbath of the Fox Devils. I did talk about this book in a recent video where I talked about underrated and hidden gem horror books that I read in 2024. I do recommend, if you haven't already seen that video, please go check it out. I'll link it below and in the cards above. I go into a little bit more depth about the story, and I truly think if you don't mind religion in your horror books, you could like this one, because there are some religious elements. Some people don't like that. I love that. I think it makes for an even more fascinating read sometimes, and in this case, that is definitely true. The last couple years, I have been really into weird reads. So here we have the category for the weirdest book that I read in 2024. The nominees are House of Rot, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, The Maw, and By the Light of Dead Stars. House of Rot I discovered from Katrina. It was one of her book club picks. Her book club is called the Reaper Book Club, and you could find her channel over at the channel Katrina Brown. Check her out. This was so bleak, so strange, so hard to decipher, but I think there was a lot of meaning packed in to this very short novella, and yeah, it was weird. Next up, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. This one was so weird that I can't even explain why I like it, or truly what the actual story is about. This man, he loses a cat. Then suddenly his wife leaves him. He's trying to figure out where she went, why did she leave, and things keep developing. And then he winds up chilling at the bottom of a well. Why? We don't even really understand it as the reader, even as we go, but that's what made it so charming, at least for me. The Maw. I was given an advanced reading copy from the author, thank you so much, and this is another book that I talked about in my hidden gem underrated horror book video that I already told you about, so if you want to hear me talk more about it, check that out, but very underrated. I thought it'd be a perfect book for people who love weird stuff like I do. And last but not least, By the Light of Dead Stars. I already read one book by Andrew Van Wey, which was Head Like a Hole, and this book, just like Head Like a Hole, was also weird and also leaned kind of cosmic, which I love. But what differed between the two is By the Light of Dead Stars had a little bit more time that you spent with our main character and her uncle as they moved to a new town and tried to get adjusted to life together, because there was a tragedy in their family, and now, you know, they're together just trying to make do with what they have and make do just the two of them. And so that part's emotional, and we do just get a lot of development, but then at the end, things really ramp up, and it goes in interesting directions, and I should say that this is the first book of a series, and I do plan on continuing. But for me, there was one clear winner that was weirder than weird. It was the weirdest of the weird, and that would be The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle. I have talked about this book many times since I've read it, and I'm just perplexed about why it resonated with me so much, but it did make me think, and it did make me philosophize about life, and I think those are some of the best books. But I can't deny that it was indeed weird as hell. Our next category is for the book that was the zaniest read for me for 2024. You might be saying, aren't zany and weird the same things? No. I think, in my opinion, a zany book is a weird book, but humorous. A weird book, you know, make it a little funny, make it a little quirky, make it a little, I don't know, lighter in a way. In some ways, not always. These books are still pretty dark, but there is some humor to them and some lightness to balance out the darkness and to balance out that weirdness. Our nominees: Man, F This House by Brian Assman. Really different in terms of a haunted house story done a way I've never seen it done before. And funny, because Brian Assman's books tend to be humorous, and this one was no different. The Despicable Fantasies of Quentin Serkinoff is my next nominee, and I've talked about this one before. It is zany, wild. We've got a dual timeline. In one timeline, we're following our main character, Quentin, and he is a professional wrestler. Then in our other timeline, which jumps ahead into the future, he is then a dinosaur. He's no longer able to be a professional wrestler. And how he gets from point A as a wrestler to point B as a dinosaur is one of the great things that you want to read this book for. But there is a lot of humor in it, and there's also a lot of nostalgic references, including plenty of references to Pretty in Pink, which is our main character Quentin's favorite movie, and he watches it all the time. And our final nominee, we've got Freezer Burn by Joe R. Lansdale. This one was awesome. It had a traveling carnival setting. We're following a group of misfits. They're labeled as a freak show, and they travel around, and this guy, down on his luck, trying to run away from the police for a botched robbery, winds up landing in with this traveling carnival. How he winds up with them is pretty hilarious in itself and zany and weird, but it develops even further from there. The story goes to directions that I couldn't even see. I loved it. This one definitely had some darkness to it, but overall, it was masterful storytelling, really great book, especially if you like carnivals or, quote, freak shows in your books. This one could be one that you really jive with like I did. Okay, and one book had to come out as the zaniest, and that would be The Despicable Fantasies of Quentin Serganoff. Like I said, this one, wild time. I feel like you got professional wrestling references and dinosaur stuff in the same book. It's pretty damn zany. When we're dealing with dinos that are taken seriously in the story, it's gotta win as the zaniest. Moving on with the award for Best Characterization. So books with really fleshed out characters, really well written characters, characters you feel like you know, characters you're rooting for, or in some cases, characters that you love to hate. When we're talking about villains or antagonists, of course. My nominees for this category are Mother Dear by Ivy Tholen, A Choir of Ill Children, Speaks the Nightbird by Robert McCammon, Summer of Night by Dan Simmons, Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, Boys in the Valley by Philip Fracassi, and Watership Down by Richard Adams. This one is so tough for me because there are two especially that stick out for me, but all the nominees are great. If you like well-developed characters, I think you can't go wrong with any of these. Summer of Night had such a great, fleshed-out group of kid characters. I really want to especially shout that one out right now. Specifically, there are two characters who are brothers, and they had the cutest relationship. It's one of my favorite sibling relationships I've ever read. I just adored them so much. Same with Boys in the Valley. We had some standout kid characters in that one, and some really unlikable other grown-up characters. But there were some good grown-up characters too, but there were a couple that you just loathed in Boys in the Valley specifically. Dark Matter, you're really rooting for the main character, for him to figure out what is going on, what reality is the real reality for him, and if it's not the one he's in, how can he get back to his real reality? Mother Dear, we are following a very dysfunctional family, and although they're dysfunctional, they're actually quite likable, and although we might not be able to relate to some of their more murderous instincts, I'm sure we can relate to how they get on each other's nerves and they test each other, but at the end of the day, they're still family and they're still there for each other. Speaks the Nightbird by Robert McCammon. You guys know I love Robert McCammon. If you're new here, he's my favorite author. And that is for many reasons. One of the reasons, he's great at characterization. And with Speaks the Nightbird, it is no different. But what is different than the other books I've read from Robert McCammon when it comes to Speaks the Nightbird is that this one was a historical set book. Although it took place back in the day in the 1600s, I think it was 1699, he still made me care about these old school, really, really old school characters. And so I think that's a testament to how wonderful of an author he is. And last but not least, Watership Down blew me away. The language was superb, and he did such a good job at making every rabbit its own distinct character. You might be thinking, how can you make all these rabbits that different from each other? They're rabbits. He does it so well to where he gives a personality and infuses each bunny with its own vibe, its own characteristics. And I loved that about it. It made it even better of a reading experience. The winner is Robert McCammon for Speaks the Nightbird. I think the characterization in this book is so good. Like I said, who would have thought I would give a shit, pardon my French, about characters from 1699? Well, thank you, Robert McCammon, because I do care because of you and your great characterization. Matthew is our main character. We are following him and his boss, aka the magistrate, which is like a judge in olden times. He works for him, and they're both going to preside over a, quote, witch trial. Will they have to persecute this woman for witchcraft? And a lot happens along the way. It's a very slow burn mystery, but when I think you should read it for more than the mystery is the characters. Matthew, he had all the odds stacked against him, but he was still wanting to get to the truth, to the bottom of things. Matthew is so smart. It reminded me a lot of Sherlock Holmes and the type of character he was, but make him American, and it just worked really well in this book, and I can't wait to continue on because it's the first book in a series. Next award is for the most emotional book, and I do want to clarify emotional in that it makes you feel a lot of different emotions, not just sadness, because if I was to give away a just plain old the saddest book I ever read, that's a specific thing, a specific emotion. This one's just a book could have made me feel sad, angry, frustrated, a whole bunch of different emotions, the gamut of emotions. So this category are for books that meet those criteria. So we've got In the Company of Witches, We Need to Talk About Kevin, and finally, The Carnival at Bray. So what is emotional about We Need to Talk About Kevin is, what do you do as a parent if your kid turns out not right? He ends up committing heinous, evil crimes. Do you feel at fault? What is the cause? And how do you deal with that as a parent? Very emotional. Sometimes I hated certain characters. Sometimes I cried and was sad. It was really a in-depth, multifaceted experience when we talk about reading. And I sometimes still think about this book. Really, it examines, nature versus nurture and all of those discussions you can have around that debate. In the Company of Witches, one of our main characters is recovering from the loss of her husband, and she is a witch, but she hasn't been able to do magic since her husband passed away. And the end especially just made me bawl, just cry, but the rest of the book made me happy and joyful, and I laughed out loud at times, but I also was concerned and cared for the characters. So it was different emotions than just sadness, because the end wasn't even just sad by itself. It was sad, but also beautiful and wonderful what happened. So it made me cry for a lot of different reasons, especially at the end. But all throughout, I felt a whole bunch of different things, and it's a fantastic book all around. And last but not least, The Carnival at Bray, a coming-of-age story. A girl and her family move to Ireland, and she has to get used to life there. She meets someone who she feels is her first love, and there's a lot of ups and downs with that. And it also has references to the death of Kurt Cobain. It also has other depictions of grief outside of that as well. And overall, just a really, really wonderful and poignant coming-of-age story. Now for our winner for the most emotional award. This goes to We Need to Talk About Kevin. I feel like it couldn't have gone to the others, only because no other book made me feel anger or frustration or puzzlement like the main character did. But also the father of Kevin made me really angry at times, and I felt for the mother, but also at times she made me annoyed. So I felt a lot of different things, but at the end what I felt most of all was sadness at the situation, and it really made me think a lot, because this is something that is so realistic, and you just think to yourself, what if you were in that situation? How would you handle it? How would you feel? And how could you move on with your life if your child did commit some crazy, terrible, horrible act? Would you be able to move on after that? And how would you face the world? Now for the bleakest category. These books, they are really, really dark, really hopeless type of situations and scenarios that go down in these reads. So our nominees are Where I End by Sophie White, We Need to Talk About Kevin, and House of Rot. I already talked about We Need to Talk About Kevin, but everything I said still stands, and as emotional as it was also just as bleak, because as a parent, what the hell do you do? House of Rot. Weird, but bleak in that it makes you contemplate the meaning of life, and is there any meaning, and what is there to look forward to? Not only in this life, but maybe whatever comes after it as well. And last but not least, Where I End by Sophie White. This one, I just can't explain why it was so bleak. This woman on this island is shunned by the small community. She is also helping her grandmother take care of her invalid mother. That in itself is very bleak, the way this main character, this woman helping to take care of her mother, she's so mean and very negative in the way she speaks about taking care of her mother, that in itself is very off-putting and just very bleak feeling. But it gets worse from there. As you spend time reading this little novella, it just gets bleaker and bleaker and bleaker, and the ending is probably the bleakest part of all. So it's weird to say you enjoy bleak books, but I do enjoy bleak books because those are some of the more impactful type of books, and all of these definitely, I would say, are impactful in one way, shape, or form. But we do have to choose a winner, and for me, that winner is dun, 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 Where I End by Sophie White. I do think that this is an underrated book. More people should check it out. It is getting a little bit more love lately, but when I first read it back in March, nobody was talking about it, so I do love highlighting it here, and if you're looking for something super bleak, this could be for you. A really tough category is coming up next. It's gonna be almost impossible to choose, kind of. So this is for the best audiobook. And I listen to so many audiobooks in general, but so many of those that I listened to were amazing. So it's very difficult for me to narrow down even a list of nominees. But here are my nominees. The Hike by Drew McCary. This one, fantastic. I specifically loved the voice of this crab character. The way the inflections of the crab were done was masterful. I laughed so many times when the crab was talking back to our main character. Oh, I love the crab. Am I biased because is the crab just making it the main reason why this audiobook is on the list? Maybe. I don't know, maybe. Overall, though, it was a great audiobook, not just because of the crab, but the crab was indeed my favorite part of the audiobook. But whatevs. Next nominee, Autumn Crow by Cameron Chaney. This one is fantastic. This book has been out a while, but the audiobook just came out in 2024, so I was so happy I got to reread it with audio to experience it in a different way. And you know the audio is good when it adds to the reading experience, and that's what this audiobook did. Highly recommend. Next up, Where the Chill Waits. I do want to shout out Crossroad Press, who do a lot of republishing of old school horror books like this one. So if you have trouble finding these hidden gems in used bookstores, then Crossroad Press is a publisher you should be paying attention to, because if it weren't for them, we wouldn't be able to check out these types of books unless we were lucky enough to find them in the wild, which is difficult. I don't even own a vintage copy of this one, so I've never been lucky enough to find it. However, thanks to Crossroad Press, not only is there an ebook, there's also an audiobook, and I loved the audiobook. The narration was fantastic, really great atmosphere in the audiobook, and there was even some creepy sounds in the book as well. So, highly recommend, and again, props to Crossroad Press, who actually has another book on this best audiobook list, which I'll get to in a minute. But our next nominee is Bunnicula, and this was narrated by Victor Garber. Perfect, so cute, great voice work in terms of each character has a specific, very unique voice. Very well done. Next up, Speaks the Nightbird by Robert McCammon. Honestly, all of Robert McCammon's audiobooks are great. They always pick wonderful narrators. I don't know who cast these for Robert McCammon, but I have never listened to a Robert McCammon audiobook that I didn't like. So this one, it's kind of standard that of course I'm going to put a Robert McCammon audiobook on here. And last nominee, but not least, we've got The Light at the End by Skip Inspector. The audiobook was narrated by Chet Williamson, and he has one of the most amazing narration voices. I love his narration style. Just a very classic voice. I can't explain why I like it so much. It just really enhances the story for me, just hearing him speak the words out loud. It's not like he does overly specific voices for different characters. I just really like his narration, period, even when he's just narrating thoughts and sentences and not speaking in a character's voice per se. This is another Crossroad Press released audiobook, just like Where the Chill Waits. If you've been watching my channel for a long time, you might have an idea who the winner here is, and it is Bunnicula. I love Bunnicula. Victor Garber knocked it out of the park with this narration. It is the cutest narration I've ever heard of an audiobook ever. Next up, favorite character, and my nominees for this are Ralph, the spider from Cackle by Rachel Harrison. He's so cute! And then, of course, I mentioned him already, the crab from The Hike. He is so funny and so freaking saucy. I like him. And he's a little salty too, so saucy and salty. It's an alliteration, a tongue twister, but that is what he is. I already mentioned these characters, but I'm mentioning them again. The characters from Bunnicula, all of them, they're so cute. But I think my favorite would have to be Chester the cat. His heart shines through, even if his arrogance gets in the way sometimes. And last but not least, I've already talked about this character before, Matthew from Speaks the Nightbird by Robert McCammon. Matthew is such a well-rounded character. You really feel for him. He's kind of conflicted. What should he do about his future? And what should he do about this trial? He has real concerns about what's going on in the town and how fair this trial is, or maybe unfair this trial is. And he tries to get to the bottom of things, but he keeps facing roadblocks at every turn. So because of all of that, you really just sympathize and empathize with him quite a lot throughout the book. But I do indeed have to pick a favorite, and it is torture to pick one out of all of these characters who I really truly love. But I think I'm going with the crab from The Hike, because he's just one of a kind. I can't say enough good things about him. He's fantastic. So let's talk about the inverse of favorite character, which to me would be best villain. The characters you just love to hate, really well written, smarmy, deplorable characters. And honestly, one villain sticks out above the rest, almost as a sore thumb, you could say. He is by far, not even close to the others, my favorite villain, and that would be the villain from The Light at the End by Skip Inspector. And the villain, it's this vamp named Rudy, and apparently this character Rudy was the inspiration for Spike from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV show. I love Spike, so it may come to no surprise that I also really love Rudy as a villain, or I love to hate Rudy, because he is really despicable and terrible, but there's also more that happens to Rudy where you're like, oh, anyway, I don't know, anyway. Rudy! He's wonderful. And I just pictured Spike. I think that was part of the reason why I like him so much, is because I pictured Spike the whole time in my head when I was reading about Rudy and what he was doing and the chaos he was inflicting upon New York, old school New York, whatevs. Next category is for the coziest read. Dun, 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 dun. My nominees are Steeped to Death. Sounds like a menacing title, but it was rather cozy, I must admit. It's a cozy mystery, and those are meant to be cozy. This one did the job and checked all the boxes. Next up, In the Company of Witches, also a cozy mystery, but this one had emotion to boot and great characterization. And then, last but not least, we've got Cackle by Rachel Harrison. There was something so cozy, really not about the story itself, but more about Rachel Harrison's writing. There was just something so easy to absorb about it, and I just loved it. I loved her style, and it felt cozy. I don't know how else to describe it. But the winner for coziest book has to be In the Company of Witches. This is like the ultimate cozy mystery. I didn't even think I was a fan of cozy mysteries until I read this one. And then after that, I was like, maybe I should give cozy mysteries a try. So this one really kind of got the ball rolling for me when it came to checking out that genre of book, and for that reason, it had to win the coziest award, because it started the whole thing. I don't think I'd even have a coziest award if it wasn't for this one. I mean, maybe I would, because I still would have read Cackle, but I wouldn't have read Steeped to Death if it wouldn't have been for In the Company of Witches, so maybe it would have just been an award given to Cackle, but I don't think I would have even thought of having this category if it had not been for In the Company of Witches. Next up, Best Setting, and this one might be one of the categories where I have the most nominees, so let's get right into it. We've got The Light at the End by Skip Inspector. The setting is old school, gritty New York, gross subways, dark tunnels, it's wonderful. Rats scurrying about. Then we've got Carrick Glynn by Tony Urban. This one, we are in a small town, and then we go and travel to another small town about 60% into the book. And it is a really strange place, and really strange things occur. Next up, Dark Matter. We've got an Arctic setting, and it's so creepy because it's isolated for the most part. Our main character is alone. It is pitch black night all the time at this point where he's stuck alone there. And to me, that is a great isolated setting that makes for a spooky, creepy read. The Carnival at Bray. To me, the setting of Bray really came alive. There really isn't a carnival as a big part of the story. It's a very small part of the story. The setting really more is Bray itself, and you really get a sense of the place, and that's what I really loved about it. I already mentioned this book many times, but Speaks the Nightbird. McKimmon did a great job at making you really feel like you were in 1600s North America. Insane. I have to imagine he did an insane amount of research to write this book, but I think it paid off because I felt like I was there. Another cold setting for a book would be Maynard's house. And this one, we're in Maine. It's very snowy. It's very, very isolated in terms of this guy inherits this house. He goes to stay there. There's really no neighbors close by. The closest one has to come by every few days by car. And the setting just feels like another character in the story, honestly, including the setting of the house itself. Not just the winter setting of Maine, but the house within the winter setting of Maine. And that feels like it's a part of the story, a concrete character almost. And last but not least, we've got Diviola. Such a unique take on a haunted type of story, because this book is not set in your traditional gloomy, dreary haunted house. It is set in a Italian villa. And you just don't think haunted when you hear Italian villa. But for this story, it really worked, and I thought it was a genius setting because it flipped what most people expected for a haunted house type of story on its head. However, I have chosen a winner, and that winner is Dark matter, really well done, isolated setting. If you want cold vibes, this is the book for you, but do beware, it is a slow burn, but it worked for me. And I would say the horror is rather subtle. Now to the category for best atmosphere. So this is kind of hard to define in terms of what do I mean by atmosphere, but to me this means a feeling you get from reading the book. It could be a dark feeling, it could just be something that the writing evokes, but let's just go through the nominees and maybe you'll understand more what I mean. First, we've got Devil's Creek by Todd Kessling. This definitely had a darkness in the writing and the setting, and just overall it made for a very eerie atmosphere. Next, Where the Chill Waits, another eerie, slow burn atmosphere set in a bleak, dark forest where it seems like supernatural elements are running amok, and our main characters have to contend with that. Next up, Bad Movie Night by Patrick Lacey. This one had a lot of atmosphere, not just dark and scary atmosphere, but movie-loving atmosphere that I appreciated personally. So I thought this had a lot of different elements that made it a really, really wonderful little novella. Another slow burn book on my list, and a lot of these are slow burns because to me those are some of the most atmospheric books, and if a slow burn can't do the atmosphere right, then you're not going to be into it. It's not going to be worth the journey. So the next slow burn nominee is The Ceremonies by T.E.D. Klein. Again, like the others, this one just oozed atmosphere, and it really created a sense of dread. Next nominee is Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews, and this one had an atmosphere that was more conveyed with the writing, the very gothic style. It just really made for a wonderful, angsty read. And last nominee, but not least, we've got Dark Matter, mentioned again here. And of course, along with the winter isolated setting comes atmosphere, and there is an atmosphere of loneliness, dread, paranoia, wonderfully done. And the Kelsi Corn goes to Where the Chill Waits by T. Chris Martindale. Frickin' this book, so atmospheric. The whole time, I don't know what it was, there was just something in the writing and the setting that made me on edge, even though, like I said, it was a slow burn, but it didn't matter. I was still really there for the ride, and I couldn't wait to see what unfolded. Next category is for the book with the best retro vibes, and this one, what I mean is a modern book that has retro vibes in some way, either in its setting, if it was set in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, not a modern setting, but it is a modern published book. Or it could have some kind of old technology involved in the story. So our nominees are Dead Flip, which is a YA book that takes place in the 90s, and I loved all the old school references. I loved our characters who were growing up, coming of age in the 90s, and there is a pinball machine at the center of the story. Next up, a romance book on my list for best retro book, and that is The First Date Prophecy. This one was fantastic. The retro vibes don't come from the time period in which this is set, because it's actually set during modern times. However, one of the main characters is a grown-up 90s star, so the retro vibes comes from the characterization in the book, which I thought was fantastic, considering one of the authors is Danny Temporelli, aka an actual grown-up 90s star. So I thought that was just wonderfully done. Next up, Bad Movie Night. It's about this YouTube channel, and they review B-movies, and a lot of them are B-movies from the 80s and 90s, just old school movies. And of course, we get a haunted, cursed film type of scenario, and that's where the retro vibes come in. Next nominee is Joey Leonard's Last Movie Marathon, and this one also has those same type of old school VHS, old school movie type of retro vibes, and it was very, very well done. Lots of old school references as well, including references to one of my favorite horror movies, Phantasm 2. Next up, The Carnival at Bray. This one does take place back in the day, and we do get to see the main character's reaction to the death of Kurt Cobain. Next book is Dead 11, a community on an island, basically trapped in a certain year of the 90s, and they can't move past it, but why they can't move past it is part of the mystery. And last but not least, we've got The Wicked by James Newman. This one was not written in the past or set in the past, doesn't have a lot of old school technology involved, but what makes it have retro vibes, in my opinion, is it's written like a very vintage style horror book, but it's a modern or more modern book. But somehow, the writing, there was just something about it, to me, that evoked an old school type of feel. And because it was so hard to choose, I actually went with The Wicked, and that's because of the retro vibes that the writing gave off. It was just so well done. It really is something you can't place your finger on when it comes to the writing feeling retro, but in this way, I mean it in a positive, great way. It was really enjoyable, and the whole time I was like, is this a paperback from hell? But in, like, the best, most enjoyable way. Next category is for the best romance I read in 2024, and I have a few nominees here, because I read quite a bit of romance, which I really thoroughly enjoyed doing, so who am I? Who am I? It's insane. Alright, so our nominees are A Little Magic, The First Date Prophecy, My Halloween Romance, and Twice Shy. A Little Magic is so cute. It's about childhood friends who then kind of start to develop feelings for each other, but something goes awry, and do they find their way back to each other or not? First Date Prophecy, I kind of talked about already. An aspiring romance writer who's trying to find her way in the world and find out what she wants to do with her life and how to be successful meets up with a grown-up child star from the 90s. And during their first date, they get their fortune told, but it isn't your typical fortune, and they have to kind of navigate that prediction or that fortune together. My Halloween Romance, these two people working at a haunted attraction. They may or may not fall in love, and it's just a sweet, cute, simple romance, and it's perfect for fall time. And Twice Shy is a book written by Sarah Hogel, and Sarah Hogel has written my favorite romance book of all time, which is Just Like Magic, not to be confused with A Little Magic, they're different books, but Just Like Magic, written by Sarah Hogel, still my favorite romance book of all time, and this is another awesome book from her that I gave 5 stars. And the award for best romance goes to A Little Magic. Must be something about the word magic in the title of a romance book. If it has that word, it automatically is one of my favorite romances ever. I don't think that's the real reason, but this had great characters. I loved how we got to see the two characters really get to know each other as children and then grow up together. Also, there were Boston Bruins references, which I'm a little biased because that's my team, so I really enjoyed seeing that. It was a wonderful Christmas read, just really cute, really perfect, really wonderful, and I cried too. I really had a great time with this one. Next category is for the best paperback from hell that I read in 2024, and the nominees are Where the Chill Waits by T. Chris Martindale, Childgrave by Ken Greenhall, When Darkness Loves Us by Elizabeth Engstrom, and The Light at the End by Skip Inspector. Now, let me talk about a few that I haven't talked about before. Childgrave. Ken Greenhall has become one of my favorite writers. He's no longer around, but the books I've read from him, which I believe Childgrave makes the 3rd book I've read from him, I've loved them all. They've all been very highly rated. There's something about his writing style that I jive with. When Darkness Loves Us is a story comprised of 2 novellas put together in the same book, and both of them were so different from each other, but both were so well written. That's the big thing they had in common. I cannot wait to read more from Elizabeth Engstrom. But if you've been following me for a while, it's no surprise, my winner for this is The Light at the End. Not only was it my favorite paperback from hell read, it was my favorite read of 2024. I freaking loved it. I can't even explain why it resonated with me so much, why I can so definitively say it was number 1, but it was just something about it that was like a perfect combination of things for me. Now for the award for the best book cover, and our nominees are dun, 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 Di Viola by Jennifer Thorne. I think this is such a beautiful cover, but hauntingly beautiful, because it is creepy too. Mother Dear by Ivy Tholen. It is no surprise this cover is here. Ivy Tholen has some of the best book covers of all time. I love, love, love her covers. Sabbath of the Fox Devils. 5 Deaths for 7 Songbirds. Very Giallo inspired because old school Giallo book covers used to look just like this. And By God's Hand You Shall Die by David Sodergren. This book was wild. The vibes just scream Lucio Fulci's Don't Torture a Duckling, and the cover screams kind of like 70s, dark, freaking grungy type of horror. Love this style of cover. And The Final Gate. This is also, by the way, inspired by Lucio Fulci, at least the story within, not the cover itself, but I think it's funny that I was just holding up 2 things where I was talking about Fulci, but yeah, this cover is flippin' fantastic. And the award goes to Di Viola, and the reason I chose this is because the other books are more indie. I think you expect to see a cooler cover sometimes on an indie book cover. Other times, it's kind of a cheap cover. However, when it comes to mainstream publishers or more well-known, bigger publishers, you don't always expect for them to have the greatest covers, at least in my opinion. I don't really like a lot of modern covers, but this one is one that I like. This book was published by Tor Nightfire. Actually, this is an art copy, but, you know, the regular cover looks like this too. Best vintage cover, The Abyss, Gila, Monastery, Saurian, The Feeding. As you can see, all of these covers are freaking incredible. That's really no surprise. There's a lot of great vintage covers out there. And this one was tough, but the winner of the Kelsi Corn Award goes to The Abyss. Why? Because yes, the cover's amazing, but also the cover is the best part of the book. The other books I mostly enjoyed. The Abyss was just kind of a slog to get through. However, I really did love the ending, but yeah, I think the cover is far superior to the inside of the book, at least in my opinion. So that's why it was easy to award this as the best vintage cover, because the cover really does shine. Even after you're done reading it, you're like, oh, the cover. Best writing. And we've talked about all of these nominees before, so quickly, we have Watership Down, Speaks the Nightbird, Dark Matter by Michelle Paver, Summer of Night by Dan Simmons, and Flowers in the Attic. And the award goes to Watership Down. It was just perfect. I loved the writing. I highlighted so many things. Here's an example of some of the great writing from Watership Down. I have it in my journal. I made this whole spread for the book and movie, because I rewatched the movie as well. All the world will be your enemy, prince with 1,000 enemies. And when they catch you, they will kill you. But first they must catch you. Digger, listener, runner, prince with the swift warning. Be cunning and full of tricks, and your people will never be destroyed. And that's just one of the many great quotes from the book. It's just beautiful language throughout the whole thing. Next, biggest surprise, and the nominees are Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, Speaks the Nightbird by Robert McCammon. I know that seems weird to put this as a surprise, but I didn't know if I would like historically set books. But I did like this one. Bunnicula, because it kind of took me aback how into Bunnicula I was. That's why it was a surprise. And The Hunger Games. I had no idea I would like this series. I didn't read this back when it was first released, so discovering that I actually loved it in 2024 was a huge, surprise! And last but not least, out of nowhere, I randomly decided to pick up A Choir of Ill Children. Didn't think it would be a favorite of the year, but it was. And it was just on a whim that I picked this up, and Tom Piccarelli really came out of nowhere to surprise me, and look forward to reading more from him. But I think my biggest surprise has to be Dark Matter, because I didn't think I'd love a sciencey book like I loved this one. I am really, really pleased that I liked it, because there was another science-based book that I read earlier in 2024 that I loathed. So it was a gamble picking this one up, but it paid off for me. Next category is Best KILL. I don't want to freaking say the word in case, I don't know, YouTube penalizes me or something, but here are the nominees. We've got a peen destruction scene from Maggie's Grave, and we've got lots of wonderful kills, not just one great kill from Mother Dear. We've got some kills with musical instruments from 5 Deaths of 7 Songbirds, and we've got an eel destroying a peen. How? Anyway, alright, so the best kill goes to dun 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 dun. You knew it was going to be a peen destruction scene, didn't you? Yes, but which one is it? Because there's 2 on this nomination list. The one that gets it, though, Maggie's Grave. Epic. Probably one of the greatest, craziest kills I've ever read. You'd have to read it to find out what I mean. And oops, I actually said the word. Hopefully it doesn't penalize me, whatevs. Next up, we've got the category for the cutest book. And a lot of these nominees are picture books, and one is a middle grade. You might be able to guess the middle grade nomination. Bunnicula, of course. I've been talking about it a lot in this video. Next up, we've got Simon and Chester, super detectives. Then we've got Gustavo, the shy ghost, a super scary Gnarloween. And finally, Pug and Pig, Trick or Treat. If you like cute things, you can't go wrong with any of these. In fact, you should read them all, because they're adorable. But the cutest thing ever, maybe the cutest character of all time, Simon from Simon and Chester Super Detectives. He's a little ghost, and at one point in the books, he's walking around in a pair of jeans, and it's hilarious, and he's the cutest freaking little ghost I've ever seen. Next category is for favorite subgenre of horror or favorite trope. And for this one, we've got 3 nominees. We've got weird horror books, we've got carnival set horror books, or we've got horror books with a Halloween setting. Which out of these was my favorite in 2024? The award has to go to carnival books! Books specifically set at a carnival or a circus. I read quite a few of those books in September of 2024, and it actually got me out of a slump. And it really, really elevated my reading, and my reading did not dwindle since then. So thank you, Carnival Books, you got me on a roll, and I think that's why I'm kind of biased in saying that that was my favorite. Of course, I do love Halloween settings in my books, and I do love weird horror books, but I feel like the carnival setting really helped me just take my reading to another level in 2024. Now for some rapid fire questions to wrap things up, and these are specifically from the actual reading survey that makes its rounds, and I specifically got these from Gabby Reed's in her description. So a book that lived up to the hype. Mother Dear by Ivy Tholen. It was a 2024 release, and it actually exceeded my expectations. A book that did not live up to the hype. Project Hail Mary, the science book I did not like. I'm so sorry. Everyone likes it, but I did not like it. Most fun reading experience. 5 Deaths of 7 Songbirds, specifically because I read it while listening to the score of Deep Red by Goblin, and that was such a wonderful experience. And if you guys didn't know, Deep Red is Giallo, and 5 Deaths of 7 Songbirds is an ode to Giallo movies, so it perfectly went hand in hand. Book that you pushed the most people to read in 2024. I think either Tastes Like Candy, which I've been pushing people to read for years, or Nelfs. I think maybe those 2 books. But in the future, I hope people will be pushed to read The Light at the End by Skip Inspector, and Mother Dear, and Where the Chill Waits. It asks what your favorite book adaptation is, and I don't really have a new adaptation from 2024 from a book that I like. However, a past adaptation, Watership Down, I love that adaptation of the book, and having read the book this past year, it's a very faithful adaptation. My least favorite book adaptation that was released in 2024, though, is Teacup, and that is a show that was based upon Robert McCammon's Stinger. I hated it, because it's so different from the actual book Stinger. It's crazy. And I don't mean different in a good way. I think they took all of the best parts of Stinger and just let it fall by the wayside. And it's continuing, apparently. What book made you laugh the most? I would say The Hike, because of the crab, of course, but I also laughed a lot at Speaks the Nightbird because of this smarmy mayor character who is always frickin' busting Matthew's chops, and I kept voice messaging my friend Alex from the channel The Bookubus, and I was like, oh, he's frickin' taking it out on Matthew again, I feel bad for Matthew, but I was also like cracking jokes like that. This mayor dude was way over the top, and he did make me laugh a lot. And a new favorite author you discovered in 2024, and I think that would be Tom Piccarelli. I've only read one book by him, Acquireville Children, but just from that book alone, I feel like his style is really going to mesh with me as a reader, and so I am looking forward to digging into more by him, and I think he could be a new fave. Alright guys, whew, that was a beast to get through. I hope you enjoyed I think it's the 4th annual Kelsi's Choice Awards. Did you read any of the books that won an award? Did you read any of the books that were nominated for an award? Let me know if so down below. What are your thoughts? Did you enjoy them? Did you dislike them? That is totally okay if so. I want to know. I love hearing from you guys. And if you want to leave a little emoji just to tell me that you were here for support, then why don't you leave a little star or a little award-themed emoji? I don't know if they have a trophy, but I'm sure they do. And before I go, I just want to let you know that I did launch my movie-themed channel where I will talk about horror, but also general nostalgic movies from the 80s and 90s, and sometimes even nostalgic shows, too. So check me out over there if you are interested. That channel is called Nightmares and Nostalgia, and I do have a top 25 favorite horror movies of all time video up as we speak right now, so you may want to watch that. Okay guys, but for this time, that is it for me. Till next time, you know what you can do. Keep on killing it.